A king was on his knees, his army Aisha destroyed, his empire gone within moments. Daud Khan Karrani, the last independent Afghan ruler of Bengal, would be executed, and with him, nearly 3 centuries of Afghan power in eastern India would come to an end. But this wasn't supposed to happen. Just 1 year earlier, Daud Khan had survived the Battle of Tukharoy. He had signed a peace treaty with the Mughal Empire. He had been allowed to keep his throne in Odisha. The war should have been over. Instead, he broke the treaty, raised another army, and challenged Emperor Akbar once again. It was a gamble that would decide the future of Bengal and determine who would rule eastern India for generations. July 12, 1576, near the town of Rajmahal, the Mughals and Afghans met for one final battle. One commander would secure Akbar's greatest eastern conquest. The other would lose everything. This is the story of the Battle of Rajmahal. The Battle of Tukharoy had ended with a Mughal victory. Instead of destroying Daud Khan completely, the Mughals chose diplomacy. The Treaty of Katak allowed Daud Khan to keep control of Odisha as long as he recognized Emperor Akbar's authority. For a brief moment, peace returned to Bengal. Trade resumed, villages began to recover, and many believed the long war in the east was finally over. But Daud Khan had accepted the treaty only because he had no other choice. He never intended to remain a Mughal vassal. Quietly, he began rebuilding his strength. Afghan nobles who had escaped Tukharoy returned to his court. Fresh cavalry joined his army. New war elephants were acquired, weapons were forged, supplies were stockpiled. Every preparation pointed toward one goal: war. Then fate dealt the Mughal Empire an unexpected blow. Munim Khan, the experienced commander who had defeated Daud at Tukharoy, fell gravely ill. Soon afterward, he died. His death created a dangerous power vacuum in Bengal. Daud Khan wasted no time, breaking the Treaty of Katak. He marched back into Bengal. One Mughal outpost after another fell into Afghan hands. Within months, much of the territory won at Tukharoy had been lost again. For Emperor Akbar, this was no longer just a rebellion. It was a direct challenge to Mughal authority. And this time, the empire intended to finish the war, once and for all. News of Daud Khan's aggressive betrayal soon reached the imperial court at Fatehpur Sikri. For Akbar, this was an existential crisis far greater than the mere loss of an eastern province. If the wealthy Bengal Delta could successfully break away through open defiance, other newly conquered regions across the subcontinent might question Mughal authority as well. The empire had spent decades expending blood and treasure expanding eastward. The emperor could not allow those hard-won victories to be undone. This time, Akbar ordered an absolute uncompromising military response. A massive imperial host was rapidly mobilized, placed under the supreme command of a seasoned, ruthless general, Khan Jahan Hussain Quli Beg. Unlike the previous campaign under Munim Khan, the operational objective was no longer diplomacy or a negotiated settlement. It was the complete, unconditional destruction of the Karrani faction. The Mughal war machine once again pushed eastward into the treacherous terrain of Bengal, forcing crossings over swollen, monsoon-driven rivers, cutting pathways through dense jungle canopies, and dragging heavy equipment across unforgiving marshlands. The imperial columns advanced with relentless precision. Meanwhile, Daud Khan was actively organizing the massive defensive clash he knew was inevitable. He summoned the remaining independent Afghan chieftains from every corner of the region. Thousands of veteran anti-Mughal cavalry rallied to his banner. A powerful contingent of armored war elephants stood ready once again. His most experienced battlefield commanders urged him to avoid a set-piece, decisive battle, advising him to bleed the imperial supply lines through scorched earth raids and prolonged attrition. But the proud young sultan refused. He believed a single catastrophic blow delivered to the main imperial host could completely erase the humiliation of Tukharoy, restore centuries of Afghan military prestige, and permanently drive the Mughals out of Bengal forever. Both massive armies now converged on the narrow choke point between the Rajmahal Hills and the Ganges River. There, the ultimate sovereignty of Bengal would be decided one final time. By the stifling heat of July 1576, the rival vanguard forces finally collided, grinding to a halt on the strategic plains flanking Rajmahal. Unlike the campaign at Tukaroy, there would be no room for desperate diplomacy or conditional surrender after this clash. Both supreme commands explicitly understood only one sovereign army would leave this field alive. The operational terrain itself offered a deadly paradox. The narrow corridors of open ground gave elite cavalry units room to maneuver and execute flanking charges. But the proximity of the swollen Ganges River and the treacherous, muddy trenches of uneven earth meant that a single miscalculated tactical movement would spell complete disaster. Khan Jahan Hussain, Quli Beg, studied the imperial logs of Tukaroy with meticulous precision. He carefully engineered the Mughal deployment to neutralize the enemy's greatest threats. Sparsely spaced, battle-tested imperial cavalry squadrons anchored and protected both vital flanks. Disciplined ranks of heavy infantry formed an unbreakable wall at the center, and critically, the formidable Mughal artillery batteries were locked into elevated positions, placed precisely where their devastating, concentrated salvos could shatter the enemy formations before they could ever close the distance. Across the sun-drenched plain, Sultan Daud Khan organized his defiant Afghan host one final time. His elite cavalry regiments stood ready to die for the crown. A terrifying phalanx of armored war elephants waited at the absolute front, acting as living battering rams to breach the imperial center. Behind them, thousands of battle-hardened Afghan warriors braced for what they fully recognized could be their final stand in the subcontinent. Daud rode proudly along his front line. Instilling fire into the hearts of his soldiers, he fiercely reminded them that they were no longer merely fighting for the borders of Bengal, but for the literal historic survival of sovereign Afghan rule in India. As dawn broke over the misty horizons of Rajmahal, the deafening thud of rival war drums echoed across the valley. Emblazoned battle standards unfurled into the morning sky. For the second time in just over a single year, the rising Mughal Empire and the defiant Afghan kingdom of Bengal prepared to settle their bloody regional rivalry by absolute force. This time, there would be no second chances. The final war for the East was on. As the morning mist lifted, the plains of Rajmahal erupted. Sultan Daud Khan committed his entire host to one decisive assault. Across the wings, elite Afghan cavalry charged to overwhelm the imperial flanks, while a terrifying phalanx of armored war elephants slammed directly into the Mughal center. But Khan Jahan remained completely composed. Having studied the chaotic close calls of Tukaroy, he refused to let raw shock value dictate the battle. Instead, he ordered the imperial artillery to fire in synchronized volleys. Heavy cannons roared, throwing up a dense wall of choking black smoke. Iron shot tore through the advancing Afghan columns, yet the desperate charge pressed onward. Surviving elephants crashed into the Mughal front lines. Horsemen collided in brutal hand-to-hand melee. For hours of exhausting attrition, the battle hung on a razor's edge. Then, the disciplined structure of the Mughal war machine began to prevail. While imperial artillery relentlessly pounded the Afghan rear, fresh cavalry reserves smoothly rotated into the gaps. Exhausted and disorganized, the Afghan momentum collapsed. The tide had officially turned. But unlike the fields of Tukaroy, Daud Khan had nowhere left to run. Everything would be decided in the next brutal seconds. Sensing that the ferocious Afghan momentum had finally collapsed into exhaustion, Khan Jahan unleashed the ultimate counterstroke the imperial legions had been waiting for. The command echoed across the lines: advance. The fresh armored Mughal cavalry reserves surged forward from both flanks like a breaking wave. Unwearied imperial horsemen crashed directly into the bleeding, breathless Afghan wings, while the disciplined center infantry pressed forward relentlessly with an unyielding wall of spears. The proud Afghan formation, which had held against impossible odds for hours, began to buckle. terrified war elephants, already heavily conciliated and maddened by hours of continuous cannon fire, turned back in absolute panic. The colossal beasts stampeded directly into their own retreating infantry, shredding the last remnants of Daud Khan's organized battle lines. The Mughal commanders instantly seized the chaos. Another massive wave of imperial cavalry swept across the Smoky Valley, cutting off all lines of repositioning. This time, the Afghan army could not recover. One elite unit after another broke their standards and fled. Within minutes, the organized retreat disintegrated into a desperate, bloody rout. Daud Khan fought with fierce, suicidal bravery to rally his fleeing men. Galloping across the carnage of the battlefield, he shouted for his chieftains to turn and make one final glorious stand for the crown. But the verdict of history had already been written on the mud of Rajmahal, surrounded by a ring of advancing imperial steel. Daud Khan's horse was brought down, and the Sultan was finally captured alive. The last independent Afghan king of Bengal was now an imperial prisoner in chains. With his capture, nearly 3 centuries of independent Afghan rule in eastern India vanished in a single afternoon. The gold and crimson Mughal standards rose triumphantly over the hills of Rajmahal. The long, grueling struggle for the wealth of the eastern delta was finally over. But for the captured Sultan, the setting sun over the battlefield was only the beginning of his final judgment. With Sultan Daud Khan bound in Mughal custody, the grueling war for the East was finally over. There would be no desperate negotiations, no second treaty of compromised peace, no triumphant return to the battlefield. Khan Jahan understood the brutal tactical calculus of empire. As long as Daud Khan drew breath, the defiant Afghan chieftains of Bengal would always possess a legitimate royal crown to rally behind. The embers of rebellion had to be stamped out, permanently. On the orders of the High Command, Daud Khan Karrani was led out and executed. With the fall of the executioner's blade, the Karrani dynasty vanished into history. It was the definitive collapse of the very last independent Afghan kingdom in eastern India. For nearly 2 decades, the Karranis had fiercely held the wealthy borders of Bengal. Now, their royal banners disappeared from the subcontinent forever. For Emperor Akbar, this monumental victory meant far more than winning a single bloody day at Rajmahal. The sprawling delta of Bengal, the strategic plains of Bihar, and the hyper-fertile river networks of the East were now firmly, irrevocably locked under the absolute hegemony of the Mughal crown. The empire had just secured one of the absolute wealthiest trading regions in all of Asia. Its massive agricultural output, thriving maritime ports, and vast global trade networks would enrich the imperial treasury at Delhi and Agra for generations to come. Perhaps even more importantly, no major sovereign Afghan power remained capable of directly challenging the Mughal throne in northern India. The long, bloody generational struggle for supremacy that had begun decades earlier after the collapse of the Sur Empire had finally reached its ultimate conclusion. The Battle of Rajmahal was never simply another routine Mughal victory. It marked the permanent end of independent Afghan political dominance in Hindustan and completed Akbar's grand historic conquest of eastern India. The Battle of Rajmahal was far more than the end of a regional rebellion. It was the closing chapter of a bloody struggle that had spanned generations. From the meteoric rise of the Sur Empire to the ultimate defiance of the Karrani dynasty, Afghan rulers had fought bitterly for control of eastern India. But on the blood-soaked fields of Rajmahal, that era finally ended. With Daud Khan's defeat, Bengal became a permanent, foundational pillar of the Mughal Empire. Its fertile plains fed millions, its busy river highways carried merchants across Asia, and its booming ports connected the subcontinent to global wealth, ultimately financing the Mughal Empire at the absolute zenith of its power. For Emperor Akbar, Rajmahal completely secured what Tughroi had started. The eastern frontier was safe. For the first time, the Mughal Empire ruled almost the entire northern half of the Indian subcontinent without a single major rival left standing in the east. Yet Akbar's relentless ambition did not stop there. Even as the dust settled over Bengal, a dangerous new storm was already gathering in the west. Deep in the rugged, unforgiving hills of Muir, one fiercely defiant Rajput ruler still refused to submit to the Mughal crown. His name would become legendary. Maharana Pratap. And his imminent collision with the imperial war machine would ignite one of the most famous iconic battles in Indian military history, the Battle of Haldigati. That is the epic campaign we will break down in our very next episode. If you enjoyed this cinematic documentary, please leave a like and subscribe to Crescent and Steel. And tell us in the comments below, was Rajmahal the true tactical turning point that secured Akbar's empire? Or had Tughroi already decided Bengal's fate? Until next time, thank you for watching.
Like and subscribe Crescent and Steel.